Hi and welcome to Homo Ludens, the channel on history and board game. I'm really happy for this video today as I'm welcoming on the show Andrew Rourke, or Andy, because that's the name we've been using in our discussions, game designer and publisher, because you also launched recently your company, Form Square Games. So thanks, Andy, for being with us today.
Nice to meet you, Fred. Thank you.
And the reason for which I wanted to have you on the show is that you're currently in a crowdfunding campaign for your latest game, Bonaparte's Eastern Empire. And it's a game that you're not only designing, but it's, I think, your first game as a publisher too. So I wanted to discuss a bit about this. Maybe before we start, how is the campaign going? Because we're recording this while you are 1 week in. I was curious to hear your thoughts about this first experience as a publisher working on a crowdfunding campaign.
Yeah, so it's been about 6 days now. We're recording this on Tuesday. I think we're just about to fund. I think we need about 2 more people to fund that when we're recording this. It's been a bit of an emotional roller coaster, to be honest, because you don't know what to expect. I've seen a lot of people at shows and conventions going around, and a lot of people showing interest, but there's a difference between interest and getting them to convert to buying it. So it's quite a high bar. I was only aiming really at doing a small print run to start with. It's the first game on crowdfunding, so I wanted to make sure that I did it all right and it was all successful. So I didn't want to give myself too much to do with too big a crowdfunding campaign. So I'm only aiming for a small one. So it's going okay. We're virtually on target for what I'm looking for. So we'll see how it goes. But I'm very happy at the moment.
Yeah, but congratulations, I think, for a first game like this, having the funding in the first week. You still have 4 weeks to go, so everything, 3 weeks to go, everything is going to be extra from there. So that's pretty cool. So congratulations on that. But before we start talking specifically about you and about the design, maybe can you give us an overview of this game, Bonaparte's Eastern Empire, what it's talking about, how it works, just to give people watching us a bit of a sense of what's the project about.
Okay, so it's a game that's looking at the whole campaign. I wanted to not just look at battles or individual events. I wanted to look at everything from when he leaves France to the final surrender to the British in 1801, so sort of 3-year period. So I wanted to develop a system that would enable me to cover everything from political stuff like controlling areas to sieges to movement and battles and everything at sea as well. I wanted to include all the sea stuff as well. So there's the invasion fleet, and then there's also Nelson and the Battle of the Nile can be possible. And Sidney Smith supporting the Ottomans in the sieges. So I wanted to get as many aspects of the actual campaign into the game. So the game reflected everything that went on. And each player, well, it's a 2-player game really. Each player will be sort of running the theatre. They'll be running everything to do with their side, and they'll have all those considerations to make. So that's what that was the sort of design premise. I wanted to design a system that would allow me to run campaigns, and Bonaparte's Eastern Empire is going to be the first one in that system.
And that's a really interesting design, because I had the opportunity to try it at PunchCon, so that was really great, and it felt very different from other war games that I've played, in the sense that it was very accessible. And I was wondering, was this something? So it was very unique in its design approach, like the kind of gameplay that you were offering, but also very accessible. Was this something that was important for you to make a historical game as accessible as possible?
Oh, absolutely, definitely. Before I started the design, I sort of gave myself some criteria that I wanted to follow. And one of those criteria was I wanted to try and make one mechanic, one sort of process, being able to do everything. And so once players had learned that one simple mechanic, it was then just applied to everything that you want to do, but in subtly different ways. And that was quite a challenge. That took a long time to work out how to apply the same mechanic to everything you want to do, from movement to battles to sieges to working out how much momentum you've got. Everything that is involved in the game just uses the same mechanic. So that was a criteria that, if you set that as a task, that's what you got to stick to, then that challenges you through the design process to keep on thinking to get different ways.
Yeah. And what made you want to, because you were already hinting towards at the beginning of our discussion that you thought about this also as a framework to cover different campaigns. So I guess you will want to do more games within the same system, and we'll talk about this later. But
Yeah.
what made you want to cover this specific Napoleonic campaign to start with?
Well, this is probably Bonaparte going to Egypt is probably the most interesting campaign personally that I've had for a long time. I do a lot of figure gaming. I've got a large 28 mil Napoleon in Egypt and Mameluke and Ottoman army that I do figure gaming with. So this period's always been of interest to me. I just felt that it was just crying out for a really good game that you can really get your teeth into and feel like you're playing either side. And both sides having a chance to win. I mean, people often look at this and just think, oh, well, the French are always just going to beat the Mamelukes and beat the Ottomans, in battle, and there's not much of a game to it. But I wanted to make a game where those weren't the most important things. They were important, but the whole structure of the whole campaign is important. Everything you do is important, and decisions you can make quite early on that might seem to be quite kind of nondescript. Later on in the game come back to bite you because perhaps you haven't left enough reserve somewhere or you haven't put the right commander in place. So Bonaparte in Egypt really offers that sort of framework to this sort of style of game because it is so asymmetric. It's such an interesting campaign. There's so many different sort of combatants from the British Army that virtually the same as French or regular European troops to Mamelukes, which are almost kind of medieval warriors. And then you've got loads of things in between, like fanatics from Mecca and Ottoman troops. Yeah, so just really interesting. I've always found this campaign extremely interesting.
And it's true that it's a campaign that doesn't have as many games in the Napoleonic area as others. I know of one other that is currently in P500 on GMT games, but it's really not that covered, and definitely potentially an interesting topic to cover.
Yeah.
You hinted to a couple of times the fact that when we're talking about the simplicity of the game, that you wanted everything to revolve around a single mechanic that would be applied for different things. Maybe can you give us a bit of a high level overview of how the system functions in a few words, just for people to grasp their head around how the game plays?
Okay, so I wanted the game to examine luck and skill. As a game designer, I think a lot of times people kind of think about randomness and luck in a game is a bad thing. So I wanted to try and design a game that looked at luck and randomness because you can't avoid those things, but then try and give the players a way to mitigate that luck. And so I've developed this kind of glory system where commanders are rated for a combination of how skillful they were and how lucky they appear to have been. And this combines into a numerical value, a glory rating. And they can use that rating to mitigate the game. So the simple mechanic is basically you're rolling dice between 1 and 4 dice for everything you do. And 5s and 6s are successes and 1s to 4s are failures. If you've got a commander that's got glory, you can re-roll dice. So as you roll say you roll 3 dice for a certain thing, he could re-roll up to all 3 of those, but each re-roll costs 1 glory point. And he's only got so much glory, and so you're constantly reducing your glory as you decide to mitigate situations. If you feel it's really important, you move, or if you really want to try and do better in this battle, or whatever you're trying to do. And so you're using up the commander's glory until it's all gone if you don't manage it well. And so the players constantly making decisions about what needs to be done, what they can let slip, what's important, and what you've got to try and succeed at. And you're doing that really by influencing the die rolls. And you can influence your opponent's die rolls as well in combat. You can re-roll your own dice once, and then you can ask your opponent to re-roll their successful dice once. So if you've got a commander with a lot of glory, he's very strong and powerful. And if you're fighting another commander with hardly any glory, or a commander with no glory left, they become very vulnerable to you.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting the fact that you use those glory point as a resource that is so versatile to do a wide range of different things. And it has this, I feel, push your luck aspect to it in the game, which is not necessarily something that you see in war games. and I think it's actually a good reflection of Napoleonic warfare. Sometimes it was a lot of push your luck, which I think is interesting. Of course, this is an abstraction of that, but I think as a term of vibe, it does something interesting in that regard. So that's yeah. But I think we've talked about the game. And I will have added some B-rolls also for people to see what the game looks like, and all just important to remind everyone that the images that I'm sharing are prototype images, so the final product might be slightly different. So I'm just putting it out there. But I would like to talk maybe now a bit more about you, Andy, the person, and your relationship with games. First of all, can we start by discussing what do you do aside from being a publisher and a game designer? Do you also have another job on the side? Because most people in historical gaming don't have a dedicated career in historical games. So I was just curious to hear more about what do you do in life outside of this.
Yeah, so I've been an optometrist for 30, 35 years. I was fortunate enough to have my own practice, which about 5 years or so ago we sold. So now I am sort of semi-retired. I work with my wife. She's a sports nutritionist, and she runs a sports nutrition cafe at the weekends, and I help her with that. But otherwise, I spend my time playing games and designing games, which is terrible, I know. But I've
That
learned.
sounds like you're living the dream. You're living the
Yeah,
dream, Andy. This is what you're doing.
it's been
Yeah,
really awful for me.
yeah.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
sounds great.
very
But
fortunate, really. Yeah.
how did you came to start playing board games in general and historical games in particular?
Yeah, so I've been a figure historical gamer, you know, like most people, since my sort of late teens. Um, really, mostly Napoleonic, but I've done virtually every period. I've got armies in all sorts of periods, and naval and air and ancients and everything. So I've done lots and lots and lots of historical miniature gaming. Probably for about the last 10, 12 years or so, I've been doing more board gaming. Uh, 3 or 4 people from a club. I belong to Guildford War Games Club. It's a fantastic club. So some of the people from the club started playing regular board game war games. So I got into that. And then about 2017, decided to really have a go at designing a game properly. Obviously, like every war game, everyone's adapted rules from other games or tried to write rules. I've done that sort of for years. But I thought I'd have a real crack at it. So in 2017, I started designing coalitions. That took a couple of years to design. And then I signed that to PHALANX in 2019. And that's been on crowdfunding through Kickstarter. And I think it's just about to be fulfilled, just about to be delivered.
Yeah, it's about to be shipped, right?
Yeah, I think so. In the next, I think literally a few weeks, month or so, it should be shipping out. I think, from what I've been told, they said it should be delivered to backers by the third quarter. So I think we're in the third quarter now.
So it's going to be coming soon. Can you briefly present coalitions from Phalanx game, your first design?
Yeah, so that's a 6-player game, and it's looking the original core game is set in the Napoleonic period, and you're playing one of 6 major nations, and it's all about it's a diplomatic negotiation game, and I've tried to take randomness out of that one. It's really interesting, but that one, when I designed it, I was really quite keen to try and take away randomness and luck. So there's no dice in that one. It's all determinative by what your choices are. And really, you're forming coalitions, and it's very fluid. Every turn, you get a chance to form different coalitions. So you're always looking to try and be in the most favourable coalition for yourself. And every nation has got a really good chance of winning independently. You don't necessarily win as part of a coalition. You win by yourself by just kind of being in the right coalition at the right time and ending up with the right amount of influence. And you're looking to influence the border territories around you as well. During the Napoleonic Wars and all through history, nations are always looking to dominate the areas and the regions that are around them, and coalitions looks at that. So you can win by sort of control and being in the right coalition at the right time.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's 2 very different games. One is multiplayer, very deterministic, and looking at the same period of time, you could say, at a very high level perspective, while Bonaparte Eastern Empire is more focused, 2-player, highly luck involved. It's really interesting how the two perspectives are quite widely different.
Well, yeah, that's why I wanted to design it, because the first game I wanted to take all of luck out of it.
Yeah.
It's definitely. I mean, I've read so many books on the Egyptian campaign. So many times you see through it, Bonaparte was lucky to get this, or Bonaparte was, lucky not to get the plague. He was lucky to reach Egypt. He was lucky to get home. It's luck. That's all you hear when you're reading the books. And so, that really made me think, well, is it luck or is it skill? What is luck and what is skill? And, I believe kind of luck is what happens, and skill is how you manage what happens. And different people manage it differently. Things happen to anyone, and how you manage it is how well you come out. And so I really wanted to investigate that. So in Bonaparte's Eastern Empire, the game throws random events that are just generated by luck, but the player has to use skill to manage those events. So there's lots of skill in the game in the way that you handle what the game throws at you, and that's really designed on purpose. I didn't want to have event cards where you had a hand of cards with the events in it that you then chose when you was going to play them. What I wanted to do is say, well, you're doing this and suddenly this has happened. How are you going to manage that? What are you going to do now, sort of thing? That was what I wanted to look at, because I think that's what commanders face in real life. They're doing something and then something else happens. They get news of it. They think, oh my God, right, I've got to react to this now. And that's what I wanted the players to feel like in the game.
And I have a cheeky question for you.
Yeah, of course.
Do you feel like the fact that what you read about the Egyptian campaign focuses so much on Bonaparte's luck is based on the fact that maybe most of the book that you read are written by British people?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've got about 35 different books on the campaign that I've read, plus quite a few memoirs, which is quite interesting. Lots of memoirs from obviously French soldiers that were out there, so that's a different take. I've got Al-Jabari. I can't pronounce anything, so you must excuse my pronunciation. But Al-Jabari's history as well, from the Ottoman side. But yeah, I mean, I am heavily influenced by the fact that I can't read French, and so everything I know is either been written by an Englishman or translated into English by an Englishman. So yeah.
Yeah, but that's also the thing that I wanted to mention, because it's often something that we discuss on the channel around the bias that different people get, not voluntarily, but just through what they have access to when they start working on historical games. We've been talking a lot with Stuart, for example, when we're talking about the 100 Years' War, about the fact that his perspective can be really skewed because he only has access to either things written by English people or translated into English. And there is a lot of French scholarship that looks more specifically into the era where the English were not doing so well, that is not being translated and not covered by British scholarship, which is quite interesting. So it's always, putting those things in perspective, thinking about where it comes from. I think it's always a funny thing when we're making games. But just to be fair, I played the game and it looks like Napoleon is actually pretty powerful in the game. So I think that the bias didn't. You still have, even if there was bias, there is still like appreciation for, I guess, the general that he was. But what I would like to talk about now is something that we've also mentioned quite a few times before. So this first game is the first game in a series. You're thinking about it as a system. And my question here is, why was it important for you to make it a system? And then I would like to discuss what are your plans for that system going further.
Yeah, so I wanted to develop a system because I wanted to see how I could sort of apply different themes using the same system. So some of it was kind of like a game theory kind of process. I was really keen to, in the same way as I was keen to get one mechanic in the game that drove the whole game and did everything to make the game really simple and accessible. I then wanted players to be able to finish playing that game and say, oh, okay, well, let's play another game in the series. And they already know 75% of the rules because the system will be the same. But what I want to do with the Limits of Glory series is examine campaigns that are not normally examined. As you say, there's not that many games on Bonaparte Gang of Egypt. The next game in the series is about the Maida campaign in 1806 in southern Italy, in Naples. again, there's just a handful of games about that. There's not many about it. And it's not really known. I've spoken to quite a few people about it, quite a few English people that should know. And they've all thought Maida was in Spain. Whereas in 1806, the Battle of Maida, which was a very, very small battle, it was a battle between the British and the French. It was the first real mainland successful battle that the British had fought against the French and won. And it was big news. I mean, in London, an area in London called Maida Vale was named after the Battle of Maida. General Stuart, who won, was brought back to Britain, and he was like heralded as this great commander, and it was fantastic. Why it's been forgotten by history is because, a few years later, this chap called Wellesley comes along and starts doing stuff in the peninsula, and then all of a sudden, Maida's forgotten about. It's just a small little thing. But in 1806, it was the biggest thing that had happened in the army. Obviously, Nelson had eclipsed it at Trafalgar, but it was massive, and it meant a lot for Britain, and it's kind of just forgotten. And it's really interesting. I mean, this campaign starts in there's a Russian army in Naples, along with a British army in Naples. Massena, and this is all part of the third coalition. This is not the fourth coalition. It's happening in 1806, but the Battle of Austerlitz has just happened. There is a Russian army in Naples supporting the King of the Two Sicilies. And they're now the only sort of combative force on the whole continent that is capable of facing the French. And, they're hopeless. There's like about 15,000 strong, and they're sort of stranded in Naples, and it's a bit desperate for them. And the Russian army is led by a chap called Lacy, who I think was actually an Irishman, really quite old. I think he was probably in his 70s. I'm not sure his exact age, but he was quite old by this time. But the Russians were really kind of stoic in their defence. The Tsar told them to defend Naples, and that's what they was going to do. So until Lacy heard directly from the Tsar to leave Naples, he was going to stay there and fight. And I think it was about the 7th of January, the message arrives from Austerlitz. The Tsar writes to him from Austerlitz and says, you've got to evacuate, get out quick. And Massena starts the invasion literally a couple of weeks later. So I want to investigate that. I want to, what happens if the messenger from the Tsar didn't get through to Lacy? Do the Russians stay in Naples? The Russian plan was to retreat into southern Italy and fight a rearguard action all the way. Does the player want to try doing that? So I wanted to do the whole campaign again from sort of November 1805 through to July. There'd be the Siege of Gaeta in there as well, which is a big thing that went on. So that's what I want to look at. I don't want to look at big battles and big campaigns like, say, Waterloo or Wagram or Austerlitz, because there's 1,000 games out there about that already, and people have all know about that. I want to look at campaigns that are much more obscure and unusual.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So that's the follow-up one. So for now, it's 2 campaigns in which Napoleon doesn't do that great. Are you planning to do one where the French are doing good?
Well, I mean, I've got. I mean, a lot depends on the success of the first games, to be honest. So, if after sort of a couple of games things are not going well and nobody's interested, then it'll probably, crash. But I'm also designing the third game, which is going to be a little mini game. I'm aiming to do that so it plays in sort of less than an hour, and that's going to be looking at 2 different mini games in one box. There'll be Santa Maura, which is a little Greek island. In 1810, the British Navy took it from a small French garrison. And Capri, which in 1808, again, the British took from the French. Both times, Hudson Lowe with the Corsican Rangers was involved as well. So that sort of ties those 2 together. So that'd be game number 3, but that's going to be a small game. Game number 4, I'm actually going to look and do the Vendée. I'll probably pronounce that wrong, the Vendée, which I think is really interesting, because this game really works well between combatants that are of different types. So you want to have sort of regular forces, guerrilla forces, regular forces that are not particularly good. So I'm looking for campaigns to do that. So in Maida, you've got the British army, you've got the French army, you've got the Neapolitan army. And then again, lots of people don't realise there was a massive guerrilla movement in Calabria. I can hardly say that either. But in southern Italy, there was a lot of guerrilla action. So you've got those involved. Obviously, in the Vendée, there's loads of different factions and lots of things going on that could be very interesting to this type of game. And then the fifth game will be Junot's invasion of Portugal. So that's where we are at the moment. So I've got 5 lined up at the moment.
And do you think there is a possibility for you to bend a bit the system and make it more multiplayer, like having potentially 3 factions or something like this? Because in a way, like for example, in Bonapartiste and Empire, you could potentially have the Mamluk as one player and the British as another. Of course, it means that none of them will have enough to do, so it makes sense to regroup them. But for other theaters, are you thinking about maybe having this multifactional aspect to it, which I guess the system could be good at doing that.
Yeah, well, I definitely am. And this is a bit of a world exclusive, Fred, because I haven't told anybody this yet. So the fifth game in the series is going to be Junot's invasion of Portugal in 1808. So that's the first bit into the peninsula. That's why I want to do this small game with the 2 islands. I'm going to try and do that using 3 dice instead of 4 dice and try and make it really quick. I'm going to do the first bit into the peninsula. And then if all 5 of those games have worked well and I've done all the different design aspects of that, then the next game will be, I'll try to do the entire Peninsular War from 1808 all the way through to 1814 with all the factions involved and everything that happened. And that will be a multiplayer game, probably 4-player. But again, trying to keep using exactly the same mechanics, the same systems. And what I'm hoping by the time I've designed 5 fully and fleshed them out and play tested them, then I'll be ready to jump into something as big as that. I don't want to do that too early until I know that I can make it a really good game.
And that would be really exciting, I think. Yeah. I think that could be
excited.
like I think multi-factional war games or create something like a very special kind of experience. So I think that would be and I guess a system like this lends well to that because it has this flow and this simplicity to it that makes it could make it for satisfying for player experience. Great, but it was really exciting to hear about the future of that series, potential future depending on the future success. So I will wish you success for this campaign and for the next ones. And I would say once this one is released, I would be very happy to have you back on the show and maybe do a teach and play. So we're actually, I don't think we live that far compared to other people that I have on this show. So maybe we'd be able to do a teach and play like on a physical board, so that could be a nice change of things. But we'll talk about it once you're getting there.
I could come up to the Cardboard Emperors and come and see you.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, come to the club and we can record it there. Maybe one last question before we end this discussion, and it's around what are your plans for between the end of the campaign and when the game is being released? What do you think is going to change on the product? Are you going to maybe invest in like have more art or change the components? What are your plans?
Okay, so obviously the prototype, I mean, everything we've got at the moment is obviously all prototype. So the prototype, I think at PunchCon, you played it at PunchCon. I got quite a lot of really good feedback about just kind of small things, you know, change this here and this there. So things like the glory track, I think I'm going to make the end numbers, say perhaps 1 to 10 on the glory track, slightly bigger, so you can get perhaps a couple of counters on there and still see what's going on a bit better. So, and then for people's army commander charts, I think I'm going to put a position on the army chart so people can put the troops that are with the commander on the army chart as well. So again, so they don't have to kind of count through the stacks on the board. So just I've had quite a bit of, a little bit of feedback about the functionality, the way the game plays, just to make a better playing experience for that. I'm really fortunate that I've got a daughter who is a graphic designer. So she said to me, "Oh, Dad, I'll help you." So she's going to go through virtually everything and just kind of tidy it up a bit, make it just a little bit tighter, change. So it all look the same, but just hopefully just give it that little bit more of an edge. So hopefully be good. But all the art is by sort of contemporary cartoonists, so sort of 200-year-old cartoons. And it's interesting to me. I think people that would have been in England and perhaps even in France, the only view that they would have had of Egypt would have probably been through cartoons. Not many of them could have seen fine art. They would have just seen what has been published in pamphlets or in papers, and they might have seen a cartoon or two. And that's the only view of Egypt they would have had. So I like that idea of putting that into the game. So the game looks like what people would think it would look like all the time.
Yeah, it was the popular mass media of the time, so you got access to information of the world through a lot of those drawings. And I guess it's also the same direction that John Company took using a lot of those cartoons from the era to use as illustration to talk about the East India Company. I think it's an interesting approach, very thematic in a way. So. But thanks, Andy, for taking the time answering to my questions. Good luck for the rest of the campaign, and looking forward to have you again on the show once the game is out. It's always nice to have new publishers coming in with new perspectives, so that's really cool. And thanks everyone for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, comment if you have any question for Andy, and I will forward it to him so he can answer. And if you want to support the show, you can donate on Ko-fi and you will join our exclusive Discord server. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.